Hi, I'm Robert Brunson, an attorney in Charleston, South Carolina with Nelson Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough. I'm the co-chair of the Private Wealth Services Group at Nelson Mullins, a probate court litigator and also a business litigator. Joining me today in the third installment of our three-part series is Dr. Linda Austin. Dr. Austin is a former professor of psychiatry at the Medical University of South Carolina. She also had a clinical practice for over 30 years. She's an author, former radio show host. Dr. Austin, thank you for joining us today. We'd like to focus today on what I think is the most difficult part of this, and that is, what do you do? Let's say you are an adult child of a wealthy man, and dad is declined somewhat. He's in his 80s, maybe he's impaired physically, and he has a person who's a stranger to the family, not his original spouse, but a subsequent spouse or a caretaker. And you think dad is being unduly influenced. You think the caretaker's interfering with your ability to see your father. You know dad has always planned to leave his wealth to you and to your children. And you know, you love your father. You don't want your relationship with him to be destroyed by this person. And frankly, you want to protect your family's interest in his inheritance. What do you do? It's a tricky situation.
Yeah, it sure is, Robert. You know, some of the things I'm going to say may be easier said than done, depending on your circumstances. But if there is the opportunity to keep parents physically closer so that you can really keep an eye on what's going on in their lives on a weekly basis, I think that is extremely helpful. You know, if you think of dementia in some ways as being a condition in which a person becomes more childlike, you wouldn't leave a child across the country in the care of other people as they're facing more intense illnesses. So the more you can have that person close to you, the better off you can. I would certainly recommend being highly involved in the selection of caretakers and in having regular conversations with that person. I would recommend, if you can get medical, either power of attorney or even just a simple consent, so that you can stay in touch with your loved one's physicians, who can become your allies in keeping an eye on what's going on. And so that if you're concerned that your parent is becoming more demented, you can call their primary care doctor and ask for them to have testing. I think to stay in touch with your parents' attorneys is another thing that's very important to do. The bottom line is stay involved as you possibly can.
You know, from a legal standpoint, if you are the person who is aging and you have accumulated a great deal of wealth over your lifetime, you cannot overstate the importance of having an estate plan in place and recognizing that nobody is immune from the risk of dementia and the risk of undue influence later in your life. Now, there are things you can do with an estate plan, including, of course, having a durable power of attorney appointed to take care of things in the event that you become incapacitated. If you're involved in a subsequent marriage or even a relationship that could look like a marriage, you could have a prenuptial type agreement in place to protect the interests of your children in your estate. There are certain types of irrevocable transfers that can be made to set aside your assets. And then some of those also include significant tax advantages. So having a great estate plan, a carefully made out estate plan in place is important. But once undue influence has already begun, and you're worried that the estate plan that your dad has might be at risk, there are also other steps you can take. One is you could go to probate court. You could file a petition to have a conservator, a conservator or a guardian appointed to look out for dad's interest. But of course, Dr. Austin, when you take those steps, there are risks that go along with that in your relationship with your dad, even if he, has dementia.
Well, that's right, because one of the things that can happen in dementia is there can be an element of paranoia, even in the best of families. And so, yeah, you do take that risk. And that's why I think to have those relationships with the attorneys and with the physicians set in place when mom and dad are still healthy is really, really helpful. If you wait too long, sometimes that doesn't serve you so well.
Other legal action that might come into play in these types of situations would be after dad has passed away. If in fact he had changed his estate plan and you believe it was done as a result of undue influence, you could challenge the will. A will is submitted to probate in the probate court, and there are procedures in every state for a challenge to a will on the basis that it was done as a result of undue influence. You can also bring litigation against the undue influencer for causes of action such as intentional interference with inheritance. So there are legal tools that are available, and there are expert witnesses like Dr. Austin available to provide families with assistance in these extremely difficult circumstances. Dr. Austin, any closing thoughts?
You know, I guess one thought I have is to just be aware of the narrative that your behavior may be creating. If, for example, you have not seen your parents, but maybe 2 or 3 times in the last decade, you've not been involved with their doctors and lawyers, there are people, a spouse, another sibling, whatever, who really have been involved. It's not terribly convincing if you show up after death, you know, and claim undue influence. And that's why I think being very involved and present and having that be documentable, having your physicians be able to say, sure, you know, we had regular conversations, this person was really involved and really cared. I think that's very important.
That's excellent advice, Dr. Austin. Thank you so much for joining us on this 3-part series for the Probate Litigator blog. I look forward to perhaps seeing you again in the future, and maybe we'll try to tackle a different topic.
Thanks, Robert.